Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to take a look at 5 different ways you can use the SP404 to make beats. The SP404 may look like an oversized calculator, but within this box is an incredibly powerful sampler and even instrument, perfect for taking quick ideas, intricate sound design, and even creating full and finished tracks. So we're going to discuss 2 different ways you can use the SP and only the SP to make full beats that you can release on streaming, Bandcamp, all that. Then we'll talk 2 different ways you can integrate it into a larger Dawless setup like what I have behind me. And finally, we'll talk how you can incorporate it into a DAW in one of my favorite ways of using it, as basically the ultimate effects box connected to your DAW thanks to USB-C. Timestamps are in the description if you want to go to a specific part. Let's get into it. Alright, so let's get started talking about basically the bread and butter when it comes to using the SP404 for beat making in standalone mode, and that is pattern chaining. So if we go to pattern select, so I have just the drums here and they're on I, and then if I hold sub pad and hit a pattern I want to switch to, it does it immediately, otherwise it will do it at the end. Pattern sequencing is the best way to make beats on the SP404. In my opinion, you get to use the sequencer, and there's 2 methods of that. So let's just go record. This is how you start to make a pattern. We'll hit 13. You can choose the length. You can choose the strength of the quantize, how you want to set the quantize, BPM, and then there's 2 different methods to record or to sequence. So first is real time. So if you just hit record, that gets you into the pattern selection mode, so you can choose where you want to place it. Choose that, and then all you have to do is hit record. I have a count in timer. All right, and now let's say I don't like those hi-hats. Let's hit shift and undo. So now that I've got those, let's say you want to then let me shut off the click actually really quick. To shut that off, hit shift metronome, that's 9. So from there, let's find some sounds to use. And we can just change the bus around a little bit. When it comes to bus effects, you can have these 2 run in parallel or run together. So if you go to shift 16, I have them set. Bus 1 goes into bus 2 and then into the master ones, bus 3 and 4. Or you can have it bus 1 separate and bus 2 separate. Let's leave it where it is with that, and let's go back and we'll turn on a pattern, and you'll see I have the synth set to bus 1. So I can bring it up. And it doesn't affect those drums. But if I go to bus 2, it's affecting everything. So that's pattern sequencing with real time. And the last little bit I did will work in TR Rec mode, but let's go over TR Rec mode really quick. Let's go to our pattern mode and we'll choose an empty bank. And now we're gonna hit remain, and that's gonna switch to TR Rec mode. Now you'll notice some of the options change, and that's because TR Rec mode is a step sequencer, so we can do individual steps. Let's say we wanna program some drums. Let's put the shuffle up a little bit and we'll keep it to 2 bar. We'll hit that, and there's no click, but that's because I shut it. You can hit metronome to get it to turn on, but we don't necessarily need it. So let's start with the kick, hold the sub pad, and let's put it on the 1, the 9, and then to switch between pages, because we did 32 steps, you move this knob right and left, and you'll see that menu on the bar change. So let's do that. And actually, let's make this a bit slower. Let's do that, and we'll get the snare on the 9. Let's put in a hi-hat and we'll start talking about some changes you can do. So let's do on the and, let's do the 90 velocity. And then let's drop the velocity down a bit and we'll put that here. Let's get a little more interesting here, right? Let's put the velocity back to 90. Let's hold shift and we can add some shuffle. And we can also change the start. So let's get a little wonky here. And let's also on here, on the 16, let's put the start a little late, and let's shut the shuffle off because we're gonna do a sub-step. So sub-step are the ratchets, okay? So let's do maybe this one. That's a bit chaotic. Let's try that, and let's actually lower the velocity. There we go, and we can add some more color. Let's say here we'll do, maybe we'll just lower the velocities here. There we go. All right, so that's TR Rec mode. You can do melodic sounds and things like that as well in TR Rec mode, but I prefer to just play those by hand. But it is nice to have the pattern sequencing. And another really cool thing is whether you record it in real-time mode or TR Rec mode, you can go into TR Rec mode once you've sequenced and edit any pad that you've recorded. Let's say on pad 8, I want to change the drums around a bit. So I can just go and hit record, go into 8 and set it to TR Rec mode, hit record. And now I can go to these drums and I can see those drums. And I recorded this in real-time mode, but still I can go and just make a bunch of additions. So that's pattern sequencing on the SP404. That is probably the best way to do it if you're looking for a very clean recording. But now we're going to talk about the second way to make beats with just the SP404, and that is the old school method of resampling. So the way resampling works, it's a destructive workflow in that you're recording something onto a pad and then you record that part and an additional part onto the next pad. So I've got this drum and these pianos, so we're gonna make a sound with it. Now, one thing I want to mention is if you're doing resampling, any effects you're using get baked into the resample. So if, let's say you start with the hi-hat, the next time you resample, let's say adding a kick and a snare, that hi-hat is gonna get hit with the effects a second time, and so it can really mess with volumes of things if you're thinking about mixing. Whatever you resample in, that's your mix. You can't really do much beyond that unless you stem separate or something. So I like to shut off any effects unless I'm doing something for color or for tone shaping when I'm doing the resampling, and then add it at the end. So let's start and we'll just hit resample. We're working at 90 BPM, that's perfect. I'm gonna start with the kick and the hi-hat. Perfect, all right, let's get that resampled again, and we're gonna add the snare. Perfect. So see, that choke on the hi-hat actually kind of works once we start adding it. So those little mistakes I would go in and fix, I have to keep it. And so it actually leads to some nice accents. Now we've got this piano. Let's go and add that lo-fi back. Listen to the difference in volume it added. Now, yeah, I like that. Okay, let's resample that in. Oh, and one thing I do want to mention, you can shut off the gate here so that it just plays through instead of having to hold it. So we'll do that for this resample. And another thing for these, I did pad mute them. So they're in a mute group so that they choke if the other is triggered. So I've got that, but if I hit 8, it cuts out because it normally would ring out, but I could cut it. Let's resample that in. Hear that second round of lo-fi and compression? That's because if I shut it, it's got that first one. Because listen to what it would sound like without it. It's terrible, right? This is it with the one round because we baked it in. And then if we add it back here, check it out. Oh, it's so gritty and lo-fi. It's perfect. And that compression adds a little bit of bounce to it and all that stuff. Going beyond that, it does have some ringing out at the end, right? So we could either check out the ending. So we can hit roll to play near the end. And it would probably be around there. Let's hit loop, shut off gate. Now, if we keep that loop on, you could just let it keep playing and add another part on top. From there, with this resample, you could make copies of it, you could make multiple versions, and you could add things on top of it. You could keep a resample like that and perform something on top of it, maybe in chromatic mode. That's one thing we didn't really talk about, but if you want to check out a video where I use chromatic mode to play on top of samples and things like that, keeping it in standalone using the SP as an instrument, check out that video. And chromatic mode is a great way to embellish. We won't do that now. This is just a quick example. Another thing I do want to quickly show though is if you really are having trouble getting that timing right, if you know the BPM you did all the resamples in, which most likely you do, you can just select a pattern, set the quantize, and then get that actually recorded in. And then make sure you turn gate on and loop off, and it'll play. If you are having trouble getting that ending sync and you know the BPM, this is a way to just get it to work and start building on top of it. And now you can get the best of both worlds. We've got that resample method, and then you can build on top of it with the pattern sequencing, doing additional drums, adding a melody with chromatic mode on a sample. And those are two ways to do it with just the SP404. But if you've got a larger Dawless setup, there's a couple ways to use the SP404 that can do some amazing things to your setup. Let's check it out. All right, so the first way to use the SP404 in a larger Dawless setup is to use its biggest strength, which is its long per pad sample time. You get about 16 minutes per pad. You have 16 pads in 10 banks in 16 projects. So you can go pretty crazy with what you want to do depending on how you're sequencing everything. So for me, I sequence everything now typically with the Digitact, and I really like messing with samples in the Digitact, but you only have a very short amount of sample time, and not only that, you only have 8 tracks. So if I was doing drums and it took up 5, I only have 3 audio tracks. But I can take any sound I make on those audio tracks and just sample it into the SP404, and then I free up that audio track, and all I have to do is use one of the 8 MIDI tracks to sequence this. And I have a full video on how to sync these via MIDI right here. It's the best way, in my opinion, to link these two. And in the next method, you'll actually see another reason why it pays to do it this way. But we'll get there in a second. So I took one of these sounds that I made on the Digitact and just sampled it into the SP404, effectively freeing up one of the audio tracks so that I could add this sound. In the context of this track fully, I actually had it set up and synced with additional gear like synthesizers and my circuit tracks. When you're using a larger Dawless setup, something the SP404 works quite well in is erasing any sort of polyphony limitations you have. Let's say you have 2 synthesizers and you want those 2 synthesizers to be making an arpeggio and a lead, but you also would really like a pad. So just sample one of those pads in. It's similar to what we're doing with the Digitact, but just expanding it in scope. So you can still have this track and open up the space on the Digitact, but if you're using additional synths, you can have extra sounds and even transition sounds. And that's a huge thing, to have transitions, because when you're working with the Dawless setup, having a lot of really cool transitions helps to ease the changes between different parts and things like that. So we're going to cheat and add this to the first method. But the other powerful perk of the SP404 beyond just the sample time is its effects. You've got a ton of amazing effects right here that can basically act like your DAW's effects if you were working in a DAW. Here in a Dawless setup, you can use all of these effects at the end of the signal chain. So let's just play that song that we were using. We've got Isolator on to start, so it gets it a little more lo-fi sounding. Gonna lower some of these sounds, and then let's drop it. There we go. We can add some reverb. And we can even get some delay. So the next method, and this one is something I'm still getting the hang of, but is incredibly powerful for the SP404. We already talked about it a little bit, but I want to expand on it, is MIDI. So you can MIDI sync the SP404 to another device, and obviously, yes, you can control the pads like we were doing, but did you know all of these effects are MIDI CC? So you can program an external device to control any effect. So here I have it set to control the effects looper. So let me just get a track playing. So the way I mapped it is on the first encoder, I have the length. Then on the second one, I have the speed. And on the final one, I have this third option to just start the looper. I can also, from this first encoder, change what effect I want. And it's all of the effects. We can go from all of the effects in the options here. As you can see, we're scrolling through it, or we can go with the 5 that we have programmed. So this is massive. And if you would like to see a tutorial on how to do all of this, it's a little bit much for this video. So let me know in the comments and I'll cover it. You can also check it out in my SP404 cheat sheet that goes through how to do all of this and all of the different CC and what they mean when doing it. Now, you're not limited to doing this with the Digitact. I'm doing it with the Digitact, but if you have any sort of MIDI device where you can program CC, you can do this. And so this is a great way to open up the SP404 because like in my most recent live set, I'm really struggling trying to bounce between all these different gear. And this solves some of the issues because if I need to stay on the Digitact to control things or something like that, I can just use these to change the effects or add effects, and I don't have to worry about moving to the SP404. So this is a very powerful tool and one I highly recommend checking out. So the last method I have for you today is integrating the SP404 into a DAW. And there's a couple of different things you can do and a couple of different ways you can do it. And I'm going to talk about the one that I use the most when I work with the DAW, and that's using the SP as a sampler to sample sounds from the DAW, resample sounds back into it, but also just to utilize all of its awesome effects and get some tactile response in the DAW. One of the things I love about Dawless setups is always being able to touch a knob and something happens, and you don't really get that in a DAW. So this is a nice way to add that. So to get this working, you're going to need a USB C-to-C cable, and you'll have to have a specific type. I have a full video breaking down how to make this happen, and you can check it out. There's a link in the description. Once you have the C-to-C cable, you can also use it to power the SP. That's the only thing connected to the SP right now. And then over in the DAW, you're going to want to set your output and your input device to SP404. You can mess around with the buffer size and all that type of stuff depending on your needs. Then you'll want an audio track, and I'm just going to leave it muted for right now, and I'll explain why in a little bit. From there, let's move back to the SP. We're going to hit Shift 13 or Utility, go to System, and we're going to move down to USB in. Now there's two settings here, Mix Out and Line In. We're going to use Line In, which means you have to enable external recording for the sounds to come in from your DAW. And the reason we're going to do it that way is this way we can record sounds onto the pads, but also resample in. It just gives a little more control. The Mix Out is a way to bypass a feedback loop, but you get some weird artifacting I've found and things like that. So you'll see with the mute on, it doesn't really matter anyways. What does matter though, you're gonna have to use headphones or connect speakers to your SP. So the sound you're getting is coming from the SP like an audio interface, because that's what we're doing. We're using the SP404 as an audio interface. So let's check out why this works so well. We have an audio track, so we could record sounds directly in if we wanted to, but what I want to talk about is using the audio track to add effects over sounds you have in the DAW. So let's create a simple sound. We'll add, let's say, a Logic drummer. So here's the Logic drummer, and let's just make it complex, a little soft, add some shaker. Here's what it sounds like. Let's get this recording. Listen to what it did. Okay, so I just grabbed a quick loop here, nothing special, just some strings. Nice and clean sounding. So I'm gonna just sample that in with some crusher on. Okay, now let's chop that up. So we'll do an auto chop. I'll do auto mark. Let's do a time division of 4, hit yes, and let's assign to pad. So now we've got these chops. So let's get a drum sound in. We'll just use drummer again just to be quick. We'll use electronic. Since we've got this drum track armed, this is actually MIDI for it, and that's something you can do. You can use the SP for MIDI. So let's move to this audio track so we don't do that. And let's set a loop for this full part, and then we'll just record something on top. Now let's say we're happy with the final track, right? All the parts, we've added bass, we've added melody and all that. If we wanted to, we could add some master effect on top of it. So let's do that lo-fi and 303, and then we could even automate effects. Like let's say we wanted to filterize like some of that Daft Punk type of house music or something. We can do that. So let's just take that new audio track that we made, and we'll just hit record and start with the filter on. All right, so those are 5 ways you can use the SP404 to make beats. Do you use a different way? Let me know in the comments and we'll see how different or how similar we all are with how we make beats on the SP. It's a very versatile machine, so there's a lot of different ways. I wanted to cover the top 5 ways that I use it. So now that you've got some beats, it's time to start considering how to showcase them or play them live, either in videos or out in the real world. And wouldn't you know, the SP isn't just great for making beats, it's also an incredibly portable piece of live performance gear. I've done shows with just the SP, and if you want to see how I do it, check out this video next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.